You've probably heard a million times that the invisible hand of the free market is the best way to run things. But what happens when that hand fumbles or, just drops the ball completely? That's exactly what we're diving into today, the whole idea of market failure.
So, let's kick things off with a little puzzle. Lighthouses are, obviously, a massive deal. They save ships, they save cargo, they save lives. So why aren't for-profit companies just lining up to build them? I mean, it seems like a no-brainer for a business, but it's really not. Hang on to that thought, because the answer really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today.
And the answer to our lighthouse puzzle? Well, it has a name: market failure. It's the term for when the free market, just left to its own devices, completely fails to get resources where they need to go in an efficient way. And that usually leads to a worse outcome for just about everyone.
Okay, so let's break down what it actually looks like when a market goes wrong. Generally, these failures tend to come in two main flavors. First, you can get a complete failure. This is where a market just doesn't even exist in the first place. Think about a private company trying to sell national defense subscriptions door to door. It's just not going to happen, right? That's what we call a missing market. Then you have partial failure, which is way more common. That's when a market does exist, but it gives us a pretty terrible outcome, like healthcare being so expensive that the people who really need it can't afford it.
So why does this even happen? Well, economists have basically pinpointed four main culprits behind almost every market failure.
Let's walk through them one by one. And our very first culprit, it brings us right back to our lonely lighthouse. The reason it's not privately built is because it's what economists call a public good. Think about a can of soda. That's a private good. It's excludable because if you don't pay for it, the shopkeeper can stop you from taking it, and it's rivalrous. If I drink it, you can't. A public good, like our lighthouse or streetlights, is the total opposite. It's non-excludable and non-rivalrous. And this creates what's known as the free rider problem. I mean, think about it. Why would any ship captain pay for a lighthouse if they can just use its light for free anyway? Everybody would just wait around for someone else to pay the bill, which means nobody pays. And if a company can't make a profit, well, that lighthouse never gets built.
All right, culprit number 2 behind market failure is all about unintended side effects. The technical term for this is externalities.
So an externality is basically a cost or a benefit that spills over and affects someone who had nothing to do with the original transaction. The market price just doesn't factor in these spillover effects on other people.
A factory that pollutes a river is the classic example of a negative externality. The factory owner gets the profit from making the product, but the local community ends up paying the price with the dirty river. But externalities can be positive too. If your neighbor plants this amazing, beautiful garden, you get to enjoy the view for free. The problem is the market doesn't really have a way to price these side effects, so we end up with way too much pollution and not nearly enough beautiful gardens.
On to number 3. This cause of market failure happens when one side of a deal knows a whole lot more than the other. It's called asymmetric information.
You see, for a market to work perfectly, both the buyer and the seller need to have pretty good information. When that balance is way off, one person can easily get taken advantage of, and sometimes the whole market can just break down.
The health insurance market is a perfect example of this. You know a lot more about your own health habits than the insurance company does. So to protect themselves from that unknown risk, the company has to set a high average price for everyone. While healthy people look at that high price, decide it's a terrible deal for them, and they drop out. This leaves only the sicker, higher-risk people in the insurance pool, which forces the prices to go up even more. And you can see how this can become a death spiral for the market.
And finally, our fourth big cause of market failure is what happens when there's zero competition. I'm talking about monopoly power.
Just take a look at this graph here. In a healthy, competitive market, you'd get a certain quantity of goods at a fair price. But a monopoly? They can do whatever they want. They can restrict how much they produce and then jack up the price. So what happens? We, the consumers, get less stuff and we have to pay more for it. That is a textbook inefficient outcome and a very clear market failure.
So we've got public goods, externalities, information gaps, and monopolies all making a mess of things. When the market fails so badly, who's supposed to step in? Well, usually it's the government.
And governments have a pretty massive toolbox for these kinds of situations. The goal isn't really to replace the market entirely, but to correct it, to give it a little nudge back in the right direction. Let's look at a few of the tools they use most often.
So, to fight a negative externality like pollution, they can tax it. To encourage something with positive side effects, like cycling to work, they can offer subsidies. To keep monopolies in check, they use competition laws and create regulators. And to fix those information gaps, they can run big public awareness campaigns to make sure we all know the dangers of things like smoking.
Okay, so after all that, what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this understanding market failure actually matter?
And that's really the heart of it. The idea of market failure is basically the why behind so much of what our governments do. It's the whole economic reason for environmental protection, for public schools, for consumer safety laws, all of it. It's not about fighting against the market, it's about trying to make the market work better for everyone. But that leads us to one final, much more complicated question. See, stepping into an economy is incredibly tricky. And while the goal is always to fix a failure, sometimes the intervention itself can create brand new, unintended problems. So it really makes you wonder, at what point does the cure become worse than the disease? That's a question that economists and policymakers are still debating every single day.